Hello, friends, welcome back. There is a moment most of us have experienced at least once, and it tends to arrive quietly without fanfare. You are going about your day, making coffee, walking to work, sitting in a meeting, or reading before bed, and a feeling settles over you that is difficult to name. It is not quite sadness. It is not quite restlessness. It is something closer to the sensation of wearing clothes that almost fit. Everything around you is fine. Technically, the job is stable, the relationships are functioning, the calendar is full, and yet some part of you keeps whispering that this is not quite it. That somewhere, somehow, a version of your life exists that feels more like you, more alive, more aligned with whatever it is you came here to do and feel and become. You may have noticed this feeling tends to intensify at certain moments. When you watch someone else living with a kind of ease that seems to come naturally to them. When you make a decision and immediately sense somewhere in your chest that it was the wrong one. Not wrong in a dramatic way, but wrong the way a key is wrong for a lock it almost opens. Or perhaps it arrives on a birthday, or at the turn of a new year, or after a long conversation with someone who knew you years ago and reflects back a version of yourself you had quietly forgotten. In spiritual and esoteric traditions, this feeling has a name, or rather it has many names. Some call it being out of phase, some call it misalignment. In numerology and in the study of personal energy cycles, there is a concept that speaks to it very directly. The idea that each of us carries within us not just one possible life, but a kind of energetic blueprint, a pattern of timing, purpose, and resonance, and that when we are living in harmony with that pattern, things tend to move with a certain flow. And when we are not, even our best efforts seem to meet invisible resistance. Today, we are going to explore that idea in depth. We are going to talk about what it might mean to be living the wrong timeline, not in a science fiction sense, and not in a way that should frighten you or make you feel that something has gone permanently wrong, but in the very practical, very personal sense of living out of step with your own deeper rhythm. We will look at how this misalignment tends to show up in daily life, in relationships, in work, in the feeling of the spaces around you. And then, more importantly, we will talk about how to begin moving back toward the life that actually belongs to you. This is not about dramatic reinvention. It is not about quitting everything and starting over from scratch. It is about something much more subtle and in many ways more powerful than that. It is about learning to read the signals your own life is already sending you and beginning to respond to them with intention. Let us start with the most common way misalignment announces itself, which is through a persistent sense of effort. Not the healthy effort of building something meaningful, but a kind of grinding effort that does not seem to produce proportional results. You work hard, you try, you push, and things move, but they move the way furniture moves when you're dragging it across carpet. There's friction everywhere. Decisions that should be simple become complicated. Conversations that should be easy become exhausting. Projects that should be energizing feel like they are draining something essential from you. In numerology, this quality of friction is often associated with being in a personal year or personal cycle that is out of sync with the actions you're taking. Each of us moves through a 9-year cycle of energy, and each year within that cycle carries a distinct vibration. A year that carries the energy of rest, reflection, and internal development is not the same as a year that carries the energy of new beginnings or outward expansion. When we try to launch major new ventures during a year that is asking us to consolidate and go inward, we often experience exactly this kind of friction, not because we are doing something wrong in a moral sense, but because we are swimming against the current of our own timing. It is interesting to observe how this plays out in practice. Someone might spend years trying to make a particular relationship work, pouring enormous energy into it, and finding that it never quite settles into the ease and depth they are hoping for. Then, when they finally stop pushing and allow a natural pause, things either resolve themselves or reveal themselves clearly. The pause was not giving up, it was alignment. It was responding to what the cycle was actually asking for. Now let us turn to the second way misalignment tends to show itself. And this one is perhaps the most telling of all. The feeling that your life belongs to someone else's idea of you. This is worth sitting with for a moment because it is more common than we usually admit. Many of us are living timelines that were shaped, at least in part, by other people's expectations, a parent's dream, a culture's template, a relationship's compromise, a fear that was instilled so early we have come to mistake it for our own preference. In esoteric traditions, particularly in the study of life path numbers and soul urge numbers in numerology, There is a distinction made between the outer expression of a life and its inner calling. The outer expression is what you do. The inner calling is what you're drawn toward at a level deeper than habit or social conditioning. When these two are aligned, there is a quality of rightness to daily life, even when things are difficult. When they are separated by a significant gap, even a life that looks successful from the outside can feel hollow from the inside. Perhaps you have felt this. The career that everyone admires, but that you have to psyche yourself up for every single morning. The relationship that looks perfect on paper, but that leaves you feeling, in quiet moments, slightly invisible. The city or neighborhood or home that is objectively fine, but that never quite feels like yours. These are not small things. They are the texture of a life, and when that texture is consistently off, it is worth paying attention to. The question is not whether your circumstances are objectively good or bad. The question is whether they are yours, whether they reflect something true about who you are and what you're here to experience. And that question, gently asked and honestly answered, is often the beginning of everything. Let us talk now about what it actually feels like when you're on the right timeline, because it is important to have a clear sense of this, not as a fantasy, but as a reference point. When you are living in alignment with your own deeper pattern, things do not necessarily become easy in the sense of effortless. Meaningful lives still involve challenge and loss and uncertainty, but the quality of those difficulties changes. They feel purposeful rather than arbitrary. They feel like they are teaching you something rather than simply grinding you down. There is also a quality of recognition that tends to appear. You make a decision and something in you settles rather than tightens. You meet a person and feel, without being able to fully explain it, that they belong in your life. You walk into a space, a home, a city, a room, and something in you exhales. These moments of recognition are not random. In many spiritual traditions, they are understood as the soul registering alignment, the felt sense of yes that arises when the outer circumstances match the inner blueprint. In numerology, this sense of recognition is often associated with the resonance between your personal numbers and the energy of the situations you encounter. But you do not need to be fluent in numerology to notice it. You already know the feeling. The question is whether you have learned to trust it. Now, one of the most important aspects of changing your timeline is understanding the difference between escaping your life and transforming it. This distinction matters enormously because the impulse to escape is very different from the impulse to align. Escape is usually driven by discomfort. It says, I want to get away from this. Alignment is driven by something deeper and quieter. It says, I want to move toward what is true. When people make major life changes from a place of escape, leaving a job in a fit of frustration, ending a relationship in a moment of pain, moving to a new city hoping geography will solve what is actually an internal question, they often find that the same patterns follow them. The numerological term for this is carrying the same vibration into a new container. The container changes, but the frequency does not, and so the experience tends to repeat itself in slightly different forms. This is not a reason to stay in situations that are genuinely harmful or exhausting. It is a reason to do the inner work alongside the outer change, so that when you make a move, you are moving towards something rather than simply away from something. The practical difference is significant. When you move towards something, you arrive. When you move away from something, you often find you have simply brought it with you. Let us talk about the role of timing, because this is central to everything we are discussing. One of the most comforting and also challenging ideas in esoteric traditions is that there is a right time for things. Not right in the sense of predetermined or fated in a rigid way, but right in the sense that certain actions align naturally with certain energetic seasons. Just as a garden planted in the wrong season struggles to thrive despite every effort, a life decision made against the grain of one's personal cycle tends to require far more effort and yield far less fruit than it would if made in its natural season. In numerology, the 9-year personal cycle is one of the primary tools for understanding this kind of timing. A personal year 1 is often associated with new beginnings, initiative, and planting seeds. A personal year 4 is often associated with building structure, doing foundational work, and establishing stability. A personal year 9 is often associated with completion, release, and clearing space for what comes next. Each of these years has its own quality of energy, and working with that energy rather than against it is one of the simplest and most effective ways to begin moving back into alignment. To find your personal year, you add your birth month and birth day to the current calendar year and reduce to a single digit. So if you were born on March 5th, for example, you would add 3 plus 5 plus the digits of the current year together. It is a simple calculation, and the result can offer a surprisingly useful lens for understanding why certain areas of your life feel the way they do right now. But let us go deeper than calculation, because numbers are ultimately a language for something that exists before language, and that something is your own interior rhythm, the pulse of your own becoming, which has been present since long before you knew what numerology was. One of the most powerful signs that you are living the wrong timeline is a persistent disconnection from your own body. This may sound like a strange thing to include in a conversation about timelines and spiritual alignment, but it is actually one of the most reliable indicators. When we are living out of alignment with our deeper purpose and timing, we tend to live in our heads. We plan, we analyze, we worry, we strategize, and we lose contact with the quieter intelligence of the body, which is often much closer to the truth of what we actually need. You may have noticed that the moments in your life when things felt most right were also moments when you felt most present in your body. Walking somewhere that moved you, doing work with your hands, being in nature, being in a conversation so real and alive that you forgot to monitor yourself. These are not coincidences, they are moments of alignment, and the body is often the first place that alignment registers. This is why many traditions that deal with personal energy and spiritual timing include practices that bring awareness back into the body, not as a spiritual performance, but as a practical act of recalibration. When you slow down enough to feel what your body is actually telling you about a decision, a relationship, a space, a direction, you are accessing a kind of knowing that the analytical mind cannot always reach. Now, let us consider the role of your environment, because this is an area that is often overlooked when people think about alignment and personal timelines. The spaces we inhabit are not neutral. They carry energy, memory, and resonance. A home that was chosen out of convenience or financial necessity rather than genuine resonance can quietly reinforce a sense of being in the wrong place. A workspace that does not reflect your actual values or way of working can make even meaningful work feel like a performance. In the study of the energy of homes and places, which draws on traditions from Feng Shui to the Western esoteric understanding of sacred space, the environment is understood as a kind of external reflection of the inner life. When your space is cluttered with things that belong to an old version of you, it can make it harder to fully inhabit the new version. When your home is decorated according to someone else's taste or organized according to someone else's habits, it can subtly reinforce the feeling that you are living someone else's life. This does not mean you need to renovate or redecorate in order to change your timeline, but it does mean that small, intentional changes to your environment, clearing out what no longer belongs, bringing in what genuinely resonates, rearranging a space to reflect how you actually want to live rather than how you think you should, can have a surprisingly significant effect on how aligned you feel in your daily life. There is another side to this. Of course, sometimes the environment reflects not a wrong choice, but a transitional moment. A home that feels temporary may be exactly right for a personal year of movement and change. A sparse, quiet space may be exactly right for a year of internal development. The question is always whether the environment is supporting the life you're actually meant to be living right now, in this particular season. Let us turn now to relationships, because this is where misalignment tends to feel most acute and most personal. We are relational beings, and the people we choose to spend our time with, the friends, partners, colleagues, and family members who make up the fabric of our daily lives, have an enormous influence on which version of ourselves we are able to express. One of the most telling signs of living the wrong timeline is a persistent sense of being unseen in your closest relationships. Not unseen in a dramatic or abusive way, but unseen in the quiet sense of feeling that the people around you are responding to a version of you that is slightly out of date. They know who you were, and they love that person, but you have been quietly growing into someone new, and the relationship has not quite made room for that yet. This is not anyone's fault. Growth is often invisible to the people closest to us, precisely because they have the most invested in the version of us they already know. But it does create a kind of timeline friction, where the outer life, the relationships, the roles, the expectations is pulling toward the past while the inner life is pulling towards something new. In numerology, this kind of tension is often associated with a personal year of transition, particularly the years 5, 8, or 9, which tend to bring significant change and recalibration to relationships and life direction. But it can also arise at any point when the gap between inner development and outer expression becomes large enough to feel uncomfortable. The invitation here is not to abandon your relationships, but to bring more of yourself into them, to risk being seen in your current form rather than only in your familiar form. This is vulnerable work, and it does not always go smoothly, but it is essential to the process of timeline alignment because you cannot fully inhabit the life that belongs to you while you are still performing the life that used to belong to you. Now, let us talk about the practical side of changing your timeline, because everything we have discussed so far is only useful if it leads to some kind of action. And the first action is almost always the same. It is the act of honest noticing. Before you change anything, you need to see clearly what is actually happening. Not what you wish were happening, not what looks like it should be happening from the outside, but what is actually, honestly true about your daily experience right now. Where does your energy go? Where does it feel wasted? What decisions have you been avoiding because making them would require acknowledging something you're not quite ready to acknowledge? What parts of your life light you up even slightly, and what parts quietly drain you? This kind of honest inventory is not comfortable, but it is the foundation of everything. Because you cannot navigate toward alignment if you do not know where you are actually standing. The second practical step is what we might call a timeline audit. This involves looking back over the last few years of your life and identifying the moments when things felt most right, when you felt most like yourself, most energized, most in flow, and the moments when things felt most wrong, then asking as honestly as you can what those two kinds of moments had in common. What were you doing? Who were you with? What had you just decided or released or begun? What season of your personal cycle were you in? The patterns that emerge from this kind of reflection are often surprisingly clear. Many people find when they do this honestly that their best moments cluster around a particular kind of activity, a particular quality of relationship, a particular kind of environment, and their worst moments cluster around situations where they were performing rather than being, or pushing against their own timing, or trying to be someone they are not quite. This is useful information. It is in fact some of the most useful information available to you because it comes from your own direct experience rather than from anyone else's theory about who you should be. The third step is what we might call intentional seeding. Once you have a clearer sense of what alignment actually feels like for you, you can begin making small, deliberate choices that move in that direction. Not dramatic leaps necessarily, but consistent small steps that accumulate over time into a genuinely different life. In numerology and in the broader esoteric understanding of personal cycles, this kind of intentional seeding is considered most potent at the beginning of a new cycle, particularly at the beginning of a personal year one, or at significant calendar thresholds like birthdays or the new year. But the truth is that alignment does not require a perfect moment. It requires only a genuine intention and a willingness to begin. One more thing worth saying about changing your timeline: it is not a one-time event. It is an ongoing practice of attention and response. The life that belongs to you is not a fixed destination you arrive at and then stop moving. It is a living, evolving relationship between who you are and how you're choosing to live, and that relationship requires regular tending, regular checking in, regular honest noticing, regular willingness to release what has run its course and welcome what is trying to arrive. This is perhaps the deepest teaching embedded in the idea of personal cycles and timeline alignment, not that you will one day reach the right timeline and stay there forever, but that you can develop a relationship with your own deeper rhythm that makes the journey itself feel like home, that makes even the difficult seasons feel purposeful because you understand where you are in the cycle and what the cycle is asking of you. There is something quietly reassuring about that. Not the false reassurance of being told everything will be fine, but the genuine reassurance of knowing that you are not lost, that the friction you feel has a meaning, that the longing you carry is not a flaw but a compass, that the life that feels more true, more yours, more alive, it is not out of reach. It is simply asking you to pay attention, to be honest, and to begin. As you go about your week, I invite you to notice one thing: the moments when you feel most like yourself, not the most productive, not the most impressive, not the most comfortable, but the most genuinely quietly yourself. Notice what you were doing, who you were with, what had just happened. Let that noticing be the beginning of your own timeline audit. You do not need to do anything with it yet. Just notice. And if you find yourself thinking about a significant change you made in the past, a move, a relationship shift, a career pivot, a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff, consider how the years since that change have felt compared to the years before it. What opened, what closed, what became easier, what surprised you? These reflections are not just memories. They are data about your own alignment, and they are worth taking seriously. Of course, all of this, the personal cycles, the timeline alignment, the numerological framework, is one lens among many. It is a way of looking, not a law. Your life is shaped by many forces: your history, your relationships, your choices, the world you live in, the circumstances you were born into. No single system can account for all of it, but a system that helps you pay closer attention to your own experience, that gives you language for what you have already been feeling, that invites you to take your own inner knowing more seriously. That kind of system can be genuinely useful, even if it is never the whole picture. In a future episode, we will explore the energy of personal years in much more depth, looking at each of the 9 years in the cycle, what each one tends to ask of us, and how to work with its particular energy rather than against it. That conversation connects very naturally to everything we have discussed today, and I think you will find it illuminating. That is all for today, friends. I hope this was genuinely useful for you, not just interesting to think about, but something you can actually carry into your week and your life. If this channel feels like a place you want to return to, I would be so glad to have you here. Please do subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.